The restaurant smelled like fresh bread and quiet desperation. He sat at the corner table nearest the window, where the draft came through the cracked seal and the seat wobbled on its left leg. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. His beard was 3 weeks past unkempt. His hands, which had signed billion-dollar contracts on 3 continents, were wrapped around a glass of tap water like it was the last warm thing on earth. Nobody looked at him the way you look at a person. They looked through him the way people look through glass, through fog, through anything that doesn't matter enough to focus on. Nobody, that is, except her. She was 23 years old, carrying 4 plates and a quiet determination, and she was about to change the course of 2 lives without knowing either one had already begun to intersect. His name was Richard Colling. He had been the 13th richest man in America for 4 consecutive years. Nobody in that cafe knew it. That was exactly the point. The note on his mahogany desk had been 7 words long. Stepping out for a while, don't look. Marcus Webb, Richard's assistant of 11 years, had read it 4 times. Then he had sat in the client chair and thought carefully about the past 6 months. The board meetings where Richard participated with perfect technical competence, while something behind his eyes went very quiet and very far away. The charity gala where he had stood with a glass of scotch for 40 minutes without drinking it, watching the room like a naturalist observing a species he had catalogued thoroughly and found deeply uninteresting. And Alina Voss, polished, strategic, beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, had been Richard's fiancée for 14 months. She had cried at the engagement party. She had held his hand at the right moments. She had smiled at cameras with the practiced ease of someone who had been rehearsing for this role her entire adult life. Then Richard had overheard her on the phone. "Of course I don't love him the way you mean," she had said, her voice loose with wine and honesty. "But he's Richard Colling. You don't fall in love with Richard Colling, you invest in him." He had stood in the hallway for a long time afterward. He had not confronted her. He had not wept. He had simply, over the following weeks, formed a question he could not stop asking himself. If I had nothing, if I were nobody, who would stay? So Richard Colling had packed 1 bag. Old clothes from a Goodwill 3 towns over. $60 cash. A prepaid phone with 1 contact. No watch. The watch alone would have ended the experiment before it started. No card. No identifier connecting the man in the mirror to the name on the 42nd floor. He drove 2 hours south of Chicago until the skyline disappeared and the neighborhoods changed character, became lower, quieter, more provisional. He found a motel at $22 a night. He walked 4 blocks east and sat down at the corner table of a cafe called Marin's and ordered a glass of water and waited to see what the world looked like from the bottom of it. He slept better that first night than he had in 6 months. Nora Smith had been awake since 5. Not by choice, by the arithmetic of a life where sleep was the first variable subtracted when everything else needed to add up. Her mother's dialysis medication at 5:15. The stack of bills on the kitchen table she could recite from memory. Her brother Daniel's school shoes. Her brother Marcus holding everything together in the silent, furious way of 16-year-old boys who understand their family's situation better than they're supposed to. She was 23 and carried the weight of someone twice that age. Not bitterness, not self-pity, just weight, the specific honest heaviness of a life that required a great deal of her and did not apologize for it. She had not eaten a full meal since Tuesday. It was Friday. This had stopped registering as sacrifice long ago. It was simply fact, like the draft under the back door or the flickering hallway light she kept meaning to fix. She came out of the kitchen at 11:30 with a tray of clean glasses and saw him immediately. Corner table, draft table. He had a glass of water and nothing else and had been there, she estimated from the condensation ring, 30 to 40 minutes. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. His beard was the kind that happens not from laziness but from the suspension of ordinary life. His back was straight, not the posture of someone defeated, but of someone who had chosen their position deliberately. His eyes, when they briefly met hers, were gray and sharp, the eyes of a man thinking very hard about something specific. She went to him. "Can I get you something?" He looked at the menu that had been sitting untouched in front of him for 40 minutes. "What's the cheapest thing you have?" "Bowl of soup, $4.50, bread comes with it." He reached into his jacket pocket and counted quietly, coins mostly, one folded bill. He arranged them on the table without looking up. $3.80. He looked at her. His jaw was set. He was not going to ask for anything. He was simply going to state the situation and accept whatever followed. "That's not enough," he said. "No," she agreed. She took out her notepad, wrote something, put it back in her apron. "Give me 10 minutes," she said. She moved through the kitchen with purpose. Carl Reeves, 16 years at Marin's, a man who had developed a comprehensive and largely wordless philosophy about human situations, looked up from the prep counter. "Corner table," she said. It wasn't a question and wasn't a request for permission. She was already moving bread box, refrigerator, prep counter. Her hands worked with the economy of someone who did not waste motion. 2 thick slices of whole grain bread. Roasted carrots and green beans still warm from the lunch service. A generous portion of Carl's Tuesday chicken and rice. The best thing Marin served, though it appeared on no menu and Carl made it by instinct alone. A container of tomato soup. A napkin. A fork wrapped clean in paper. She assembled it into one of the large white paper takeout bags and folded the top down with firm, careful creases. Carl watched her hands. "You haven't eaten today," he said. She picked up the bag. It was warm against her palms. "It's fine, Carl." He watched her go. Then he quietly assembled a second portion of everything she had just packed and left it under the warming lamp with her name written on the ticket in his large square handwriting. He did not mention it to anyone. She crossed the cafe floor. She was aware of Dennis at the counter with his newspaper held at an angle that suggested he was reading it while also not reading it. She was aware of the table of office workers who had gone quiet in the way people go quiet when they've decided to observe something without admitting they're watching. She didn't look at any of them. She came to the corner table and placed the bag in front of him, not slid across, not dropped with the brisk efficiency of a transaction, but placed. The way you place something you've thought about. Then she opened it. Her hands turned back the folded top slowly, deliberately, the way you open something you want a person to actually see. The smell reached him first. Warm food, real food, a meal made with attention rather than speed. Then the contents became visible. Vegetables bright against the white paper interior, the bread wrapped beside them, the rice underneath, the soup nestled at the bottom. She kept her hands resting lightly on the bag's edges, leaning forward slightly, her smile the quiet one, not the professional expression she wore for the window table. This one asked nothing. He looked at the bag, then at her. "I told you what I had," he said. "I know. This is more than $4.50 of food." "It is. I can't pay for it." "I know that too." He was quiet. His hands moved toward the bag and stopped. He looked up at her again with the expression of a man confronting something unexpected and not yet knowing how to receive it. "Why?" he said, plain, direct. A real question from someone actually waiting for the real answer. She thought about it genuinely, not reaching for a phrase. "Because it's cold outside," she said, "and that's real food. And you look like you haven't had any today." A brief pause. "That's enough of a reason." Soup S at the bottom, careful, it's hot. The rice is Carl S. He makes it Tuesdays, it's worth eating. Bread S from this morning, so it's still good. She turned to go. Miss. She stopped. He was looking at the bag. His voice was low and unhurried, the voice of a man who had measured the words before releasing them. Thank you, he said. Not the social noise, not the reflex. The real thing, full weight, nothing held back. You're welcome, she said, and meant it with equal weight. Through the serving window, Carl watched the man sit with the open bag for a moment before he started eating, not praying exactly. Something adjacent, a man receiving an unexpected kindness and taking a breath before he let himself believe in it. Then he ate the way people eat when the food is good and they are genuinely hungry and no one is watching and they are allowed, briefly, to simply exist. Carl nodded once to himself and went back to his prep work. He came back the next morning, and the one after that. They talked the way strangers do when both are being careful in installments, in the gaps between her other tables. She learned his name was Richard, that he was between situations, that he was from the north and didn't talk about family. He learned her name was Nora, that she had 1 semester left of her nursing degree, but had paused enrollment because the fees and her mother's medical bills couldn't both be managed at once. That her mother Grace was 61 and losing a long argument with her kidneys. That her brothers were Marcus and Daniel, and she described them with the specific mixture of exasperation and ferocious love that belongs exclusively to people raising siblings they didn't choose and would never trade. She said all of it plainly, not performing suffering, not minimizing it, just describing the terrain she was navigating the way a person describes a route. He listened with an attention she noticed without knowing what to do with. Most people listened to the first clause of a sentence and spent the rest preparing their response. Richard listened beginning to end, arriving at the conclusion only when she did. You ever think about leaving? He asked one afternoon. Starting somewhere new. She considered it honestly. You can't outrun what you love, she said. My mom is here, my brothers are here, so I'm here. He was quiet a moment. That's not weakness, he said, what you're doing. She looked at him. I know it's not. She said it without defensiveness and without vanity, simply as a fact she had long since settled. It was the second Wednesday when it went badly. 4 men came in loud and certain, took the large table near the window, and began making comments at a volume designed to be overheard about standards, about certain kinds of people in certain places. The largest one turned in his chair and addressed Richard directly. Hey, buddy, there are shelters, you know. You don't have to come in here where people are trying to eat. The cafe went quiet. Richard said nothing. He had learned in 2 weeks that responding was rarely worth what it cost. The man stood. I'm serious. This isn't the right place for. Sir. Nora had come out of the kitchen. She crossed the floor at a pace that was not running and also not casual. She stopped beside the large table. The man had 8 inches on her. She did not appear to notice. I need you to sit down, she said. Her voice was pleasant the way iron is smooth. The surface quality was real but not the whole story. I'm just pointing out. You're in my section. That man is my guest. This is my cafe. She held his gaze without aggression and without apology. Sit down, finish your meal, and let everyone do the same. He stared at her. He sat down. The room exhaled. She brought Richard a fresh coffee on the house, no explanation, and set it down without making a moment of it. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did, she said simply, and went back to work. He sat with his coffee and felt something move in his chest he didn't immediately have a name for. He had been in boardrooms and ballrooms his entire adult life, and had watched people calculate the cost of standing for something before deciding whether to stand. It was so common he had ceased to see it. Nora had not done any of those calculations. She had simply seen something wrong and moved toward it. Back in Chicago, Marcus was drowning. Colling Capital stock had dropped 9 points. 3 board members were taking calls from Gregory Fane, the rival whose hostile takeover attempt had launched the moment Richard's absence became known. The $2.3 billion merger was stalled pending Richard's signature. Marcus had called the prepaid phone 23 times. Richard read every message. He did not reply. He understood that if he went back before he found what he came looking for, the machine would simply absorb him. It was very good at that. He sent one text in 19 days, "Hold the board." Not yet. It happened on a Thursday evening. Nora took the call mid-shift, her brother Daniel, bicycle, intersection, car that ran a light. Broken arm, possible concussion, county general, deposit needed before imaging. $600. Her account had 43. She came back out front. Richard saw her face the moment she appeared and went very still. What happened? He said she hadn't meant to tell him, but he asked it so directly, not "is everything okay," but what happened, as if the answer mattered and he had time for it, and she told him. Briefly. The bike, the car, the deposit. "Go," he said. "I have 2 hours left on shift. Go to your brother, that's what matters." His voice carried a quality she hadn't heard from him before, not loud, not commanding, but absolutely certain. "Please." She went. At the admissions desk at County General, the administrator looked at her screen and said, "The deposit has been taken care of. $600 cash in person about 20 minutes ago. Anonymous." Nora stood at the desk for a moment. Then she went to find her brother. She came to him the next morning before her shift, sat across from him without being asked, did not begin with the deposit. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked, the way she had been looking for nearly 3 weeks, assembling a picture one piece at a time. The way he held himself, the way he listened, the precision of his hands, the certainty in his voice last night. "You paid Daniel's deposit," she said. "He needed the imaging. Where did you get $600? "I had some saved." She studied him steadily. "Richard, you count coins for soup." He said nothing. She let it go, not because she believed the full story, but because she understood that pushing was not the right instrument. Whatever he was carrying was his to carry until he chose otherwise. She folded her hands on the table. "I don't know who you are," she said. "I don't know what you're not telling me, but I want you to know something." She paused, choosing carefully. "Whatever you're running from, whatever you're trying to figure out, I see the person who has been sitting at this table for 3 weeks. And that person is someone worth knowing." He was very still. "Even if nothing gets better," she continued, "even if you're sitting here with $3.80 for the rest of your life, that wouldn't change what I see when I look at you." He looked at her with an expression she had never seen directed at her before. A man who has been searching for something and found it somewhere he didn't expect, and who is suddenly afraid not of the thing itself, but of what finding it means, of what he is obligated to do next. "You mean that?" he said. "I don't say things I don't mean," she said. "I don't have the time." He almost told her, right then, but he stopped himself because he understood that the how mattered. She deserved the truth in full, in the right setting, with nothing held back, not a confession across a café table before her shift. She deserved it done properly. "Thank you," he said instead. She stood, smoothed her apron. "Just be okay, Richard." He pulled out the prepaid phone and typed, 3 days. "Then I'm coming back, prepare everything." Marcus's reply came in 40 seconds, "Thank God, I'll start now." Fane's men found him on the sidewalk outside Marin's the following afternoon, 2 of them professional, quiet. "Mr. Colling," the taller one said. Richard stopped. He looked at them with an expression that had nothing in common with the man at the corner table, a composure so complete it had no temperature, the stillness of a man who understood that urgency was a weapon, and he intended to keep it. "Tell Gregory I'll see him at Monday's board meeting," he said. "Tell him to bring documentation of every Vantage Holdings transaction in the past 24 months because I'll be bringing mine." He paused. "Is there anything else?" The taller one mentioned that Richard's current circumstances might interest certain financial press outlets. "Print it," Richard said. "I'll hold the press conference myself," and walked back into the café. Monday's board meeting was not what Gregory Fane had prepared for. He had expected a diminished Richard, shaken by exposure, softened by whatever had happened to him in that neighborhood. Richard walked in at 9 looking exactly like himself. The suit was charcoal and precise. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had slept well for 19 consecutive nights and spent that time remembering what he was fighting for. 3 hours later, Fane left without what he had come for. The merger documentation was signed by 4 o'clock. The stock recovered before close. The Meridian Hotel's annual community development gala was a large, warm room full of people in good clothes doing the complicated work of philanthropy, genuine care and performance existing in their usual entanglement. Nora wore the blue dress from her cousin's wedding 2 years ago. She felt like a visitor walking into the lobby, aware of the chandeliers, the ambient expense, not inferior, foreign. There was a difference. Carl, beside her in his good jacket, surveyed the room and said, "Free food." She said, "Carl," he said, "I'm noting the bright side." They found their table near the back. Nora watched the room with the interest of someone who had spent years on the serving side and now found herself unexpectedly on the other. Then the room shifted. She heard the name before she saw the face. Colling, Richard Colling. And then she saw him at the entrance, beard gone, charcoal suit made for one person specifically, people in the practiced orbit of professional proximity, and he was not looking at the room. He was looking for someone. His eyes found her from across 50 feet of gala noise and candlelight and stopped. He came directly to her, past the board members, past the press, past Gregory Fane, who had gone absolutely still at the sight of him, directly to the table near the back where a waitress and a cook sat with their water glasses. He stood before her. "Nora," he said. She looked at his face. The face she had been reading for 3 weeks, the listening and the stillness and the military corners on the napkins and the $600 delivered before dawn. It was the same face. "Richard," she said, steady. She was very good at steady. Carl looked between them once and discovered something enormously interesting to examine in the direction of the bar. Richard sat down and told her everything. Elena and the overheard phone call. The question he couldn't stop asking. The Goodwill clothes and the $60 and the prepaid phone. Every detail of who he was, the name, the company, the number stated plainly, without drama. The way she had told him about the dialysis bills and the $3.80. He told her about the board meeting and Fane's men on the sidewalk, and the deposit he had made before dawn, because she would have found a way on her own, but it would have cost her sleep she couldn't afford to lose. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The deposit," she said finally, $600, that's nothing to you." "The money is nothing," he said. "The reason I did it is. You would have found a way, you always find a way. I'd watched you for 3 weeks, I knew you would. But I could move the obstacle and you'd never lose the sleep. I wanted to do one thing with no angle to it." She was quiet again. "You lied to me for 19 days, she said. "Yes. You let me feed you with a bag I packed myself when you had billions of dollars. "Yes. You let me think I was helping you." "You were helping me," he said quietly. "Not with food. with something I didn't have a word for when I came looking for it. He leaned forward slightly. Nora, I have been surrounded by people my entire adult life, and everyone in every room has always known exactly who I am, what I have, what I can do for them. I have not sat across from anyone in years who simply saw a person, who treated me like someone worth treating well because it was the right thing, not because of anything attached to my name. He stopped. You saw me, he said, at a table with $3.80 and a torn jacket. You saw a person. You fed me from a bag you packed with your own hands. You stood up for me in front of a room full of people who agreed with the man you were standing against. You told me, even if nothing gets better, you'd see the same thing. The noise of the gala continued around them, indifferent and irrelevant. I was never poor, he said. I was searching for someone rich in heart. He held her gaze. I found you. Carl reappeared, sat down, picked up his water glass and said, for the record, military corners on the napkins. Knew by day 4, wasn't my story to tell. He took a sip, just context. Nora looked at Carl, then back at Richard. Near the bar, Gregory Fane was being escorted toward the exit by 2 security personnel and 3 people with the posture of lawyers. At the podium, the community development announcement was being made. A revitalization grant for the neighborhood around Marin's Café, with Marin's listed specifically as an anchor business. Carl heard his cafe's name and looked at Richard. Before, Richard said, that was in motion before I ever walked in. I need you to know that. Carl nodded once. Good café, he said simply. Nora had been looking at her water glass. Now she looked up. I'm angry, she said, I know. Not managed anger. Not anger I'm going to put away because the explanation is good. You made a decision about how to engage with me without giving me any say in it. You ran an experiment on my kindness. She held his gaze. However good your reasons were, you don't get to decide what people's generosity is for. You're right, he said, completely. I'm not going to argue with that. Good. She was quiet a moment. I need a week. Take whatever you need. She looked at him one last time, that reading look, careful and complete. Then she stood and walked away through the gala crowd, and Richard watched her go, and Carl finished his water and said, that went about as well as it could have, and went to find the dinner service. She called on day 5. Not because the anger had passed. It hadn't, not fully. She had spent the week being honest with herself the way she was honest about everything, taking it apart, examining each piece, putting it back with appropriate labels. She had asked herself one question on the 4th night. Was the person at that table real? The listening, the stillness, the deposit delivered before dawn with no announcement, the voice that said go to your brother with the certainty of someone who knew what the right thing was. The expression on his face when she had said, even if nothing gets better, a man receiving something he had almost stopped believing existed. She decided, yes, real. The method had been wrong. The person inside it had been genuine. She called him on day 5 and said, I want to meet you properly, as yourself, everything on the table, no experiment, no reveal, just you. He said, name the place. She said, Marin's. He sat at a different table. She guided him away from the corner one with the draft and the wobbling leg. Carl brought them both coffee without being asked. They started over. It was slow and deliberate. She wouldn't let him pay for everything, then reconsidered and let him pay for things she genuinely couldn't manage, and wouldn't let him pay for things she could. The distinction mattered to her, and he came to understand exactly why, and once he did, he stopped testing the line and simply respected it. He met her mother Grace on the 3rd week, Sunday dinner. The apartment Nora had cleaned with thorough anxiety she would not have admitted to. Grace had her daughter's eyes and her daughter's directness, and looked at Richard across the dinner table for a while before saying, My daughter says you're a good man. She doesn't say things like that unless she's certain. Richard said, I'm trying to be. Grace nodded. Verdict rendered. She talked for 40 minutes about her rooftop container garden, tomatoes, herbs, one optimistic rosebush, and Richard listened with genuine interest and asked questions that showed he was actually tracking the information. Marin's received its grant. The neighborhood revitalization was announced properly. Carl attended the ceremony in his good jacket and accepted with the brief, dignified gratitude of a man who does not make performances of important things. Nora's nursing enrollment was reinstated. Her mother's treatment was financially secured through a program she examined carefully and signed only when she was satisfied it was what it presented itself as being. She cried for 4 minutes in a hospital bathroom afterward, alone, then washed her face and went back out. She did not quit Marin's until she was ready. Ready came 8 months later when her nursing placement began. She told Carl on a Tuesday. He said, "Good, about time." She hugged him. He accepted it with mild awkwardness and genuine warmth and said when she let go, "You'll be a good nurse." "I know," she said, and meant it. Richard came back to the city on weekends. Not every weekend, because her time was not infinitely available and her schedule was not infinitely flexible, and he adapted to this without complaint, because adapting was the correct response. He built his visits around her availability, not the other way around. He never sat at the corner table again. He sat where she chose. They had coffee. The conversations went further in over time, down into the rooms where real things are kept, the fears and losses and the things you believe when no one is checking. He told her one February afternoon that he had been more afraid of returning from the experiment than beginning it. That the thing he had been most afraid of was finding what he was looking for, and then not being equal to it. She listened. "Are you," she asked, "equal to it?" He thought about it honestly. "I'm working on it," he said. She nodded. "That's the right answer. That's the only honest answer anyone can give." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The same gesture, the same posture, the same directness. The woman who had opened a white paper bag at a corner table and asked nothing in return. Outside the windows of Marin's, the street was cold and gray and going about its business, indifferent to everything, the way the world always is. Inside, the coffee was warm and the table was level, and two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances were talking, really talking. The way people talk when they have stopped performing and started arriving. And neither of them, for the first time in a long time,